Let's take a look at another tool for handling events called EventHub. EventHub is a data streaming platform that gives us the ability to ingest and process millions of events every second. As it ingests these events, it can also work with a variety of other solutions so the data is not lost in the noise. It offers support to handle events in real time and can also batch process them so they can be reviewed later on. As data is being sent to the EventHub, you can either store the data in a storage account or use Azure Data Lake. You can also use Stream Analytics to quickly review the data and then visualize it in Power BI. One of the more common use cases is to send data to a third-party tool so it can process that data. Say if you have a third-party tool that you're using to monitor your applications or resources. EventHub can receive the data from those resources and then pass it along to your monitoring application. EventHub namespaces are the first thing we create when we set up an EventHub. These allow you to group one or more event hubs. Namespaces are also specific to a region, so any event hubs that are created within a namespace must be created within that namespace's region. It is also worth noting that event hubs can only accept events from the same region. So if you have a resource in the East US, it cannot send data to an event hub that is in the Central US region. An event hub is created within a namespace. At the event hub is where we define the message retention as well as the partition count. We can retain the messages for between 1 and 7 days. Within the event hub, we can also configure the capture settings, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Once we have defined our namespace and event hub, we can now look at partitions. Partitions can be thought of as queues for incoming events. The events are always stored in the order which they are received. As new events come in, they are added to the end of the sequence. Events will stay in a partition for however long the retention period is defined. If you have it set for 1 day, the event will remain in that partition for 1 day. No longer, no less. There is no way to remove that data from the partition manually. It must expire before it is purged. The more partitions you have, the greater scale your event hub has. You can define between 2 and 32 partitions when you create your event hub, and this cannot be changed after it is created. Let's look at the terms used within Event Hub. There are some carryover concepts from Event Grid, and I'll try to make these analogies where possible. The first is the event publishers. These are the resources that send the data to the Event Hub. These would be similar to event sources within Event Grid. Each event publisher has a unique shared access signature token that it uses to identify itself with the Event Hub. Throughput units describe the amount of capacity that is available to the event hubs. These are determined when you create the namespace. You do have the option to enable auto-inflate, which will allow you to set a lower amount of throughput units and will give Azure the flexibility to scale up as needed. Unfortunately, it doesn't offer the ability to automatically scale down, so this is something that you may need to monitor. A single throughput unit has roughly 1 megabyte of incoming data per second, or 2 megabytes of data egress per second. This follows that writes are typically more resource intensive than reads. A consumer group gives us the ability to allow each application to have its own view of the data. So as data being read by one application, it is not locked, so another application has the ability to read that same data. As long as both applications are using their own consumer group, they can both simultaneously read the data. And finally, event receivers. This is the resource that will read the data from the Event Hub. They are part of the consumer group that we just mentioned, and they connect to the Event Hub using the AMQP 1.0 session. The Event Hub will deliver events to the receivers as they become available. There are a few options within Event Hub that are worth mentioning. The most common is Apache Kafka. Event Hub has the Apache Kafka protocol enabled by default, so your existing resources that are built to use Apache Kafka version 1.0 and later can talk directly to Event Hub. With Apache Kafka on Event Hubs, we don't need to manage any of the underlying infrastructure. If we think about it, it is a similar concept to Redis Cache. It's a fully managed service that has the same interface as if it was a manually deployed solution. Apache Kafka is only available on the standard and dedicated tiers. The next option is Capture. As we discussed briefly earlier, Capture offers us the ability to take the incoming data sent to the Event Hub and then output it to either an Azure Storage Account container or Azure Data Lake. The advantage this gives us is now the retention policy no longer applies. You have the data sitting in that storage location until it is manually removed. When you define the capture settings, you also define a time window or size window. The time window is between 1 and 15 minutes, and the size window can range from 10 to 500 megabytes. Essentially, this is saying whichever value is reached first is when the Event Hub will take that data and write it to the storage. Looking at the various tiers for Event Hub, we have 3 options. The first is basic and is the most limited. It does not offer Capture or Apache Kafka. It also only offers 1 day of message retention. The standard tier offers both Kafka and Capture. However, if you use the Capture feature, you do need to pay a premium for it. The dedicated tier offers the most features, as expected. This includes Capture built in, longer message retention, and more consumer groups than the other two tiers. Let's go into the portal, let's set up an Event Hub and see how it all ties together. So here we are in the Azure portal, and what we're going to look at today is setting up an Event Hub and see how that process works, including the namespace as well as the Event Hub itself. So to start off, let's get a Event Hub namespace created. So to do this, we can go up top and search for Event. And we can see here one of the first options is Event Hubs. So let's go ahead and select that. And you can see we don't have one in place today. So let's go ahead and select Add. And let's walk through the process getting a new one stood up. And we're going to place this in our ever popular Skylines resource group. And then we need to give the namespace a name. And if you notice here, we're actually creating the namespace, and there wasn't an option to create an Event Hub by itself from that list. And that's expected because we need to create our namespace first, and then within the namespace, we create our actual Event Hubs. So let's go ahead and give this a name, and we're just going to select Skylines EHNS, because again, Skylines Event Hub namespace. And we'll go ahead and select the location to put this in the central US region, and then we need to select the pricing tier. And since we want to look at auto inflate as well as using Capture, we're going to go ahead and select the standard tier. We're going to go ahead then and bump up the throughputs. We'll set that one at 2 for now. And then let's go take a look at our features. And if we look under features, we have the option to enable availability zones as well as auto inflate. We're going to go ahead and enable auto inflate, and then now we can set a maximum throughput unit, or basically the maximum number that we want to be allowed by auto inflate. We'll go ahead and set that to 5 for now. And we'll go ahead and select tags. We're not going to define any at the moment. Go to review and create. We'll let this validate, and then once it's done, we'll go ahead and select create. Now these can take a minute or two to deploy, so let's go ahead and pause here for a moment, and we'll come back. Alright, looks like that's successfully completed. So let's go ahead and open up that Event Hub. And then if we look off to the left, we can see our shared access policies. By default, it has the root managed shared access key. We can go ahead and add another one. And we can say we want this one to only listen and send. So we're just going to give this a name of send listen. When we set up a resource to send information to an Event Hub, we need to select a policy that it's going to use in order to send that information. This gives us the ability to provide some control around how resources are interacting with the Event Hub. We can also go down then and look at scale. We've got 2 throughput units defined right now with the max set to 5 via auto inflate. One thing to remember again is that auto inflate will automatically scale up, but it will not automatically scale down. So that is something you'll need to be mindful of as you're working through this. Additionally, if we look at networking, this is very similar to how we define networking within a storage account, where we control access from specific VNets, or we can do using an IP range on the firewall. We're going to leave all that for the default now. We'll go up to overview, and then you can see again here we're using the standard tier. We don't have any Event Hubs created right now. We also do notice that Kafka is also enabled for this Event Hub namespace since we selected this standard tier. Let's go ahead and add an Event Hub, and we'll give it a name here of Skylines EH for Event Hub. We'll leave the default partition count as 1, and we can also change our message retention. We can change that from 1 up to 7 with the standard tier, and then we also have the option for Capture. So let's go ahead and turn Capture on, and here we can define the window for the Capture, and again, this defines the maximums. So by default, we've got a 5-minute window and a size window of 300 megabytes. Whichever one of those values is hit first, it will then take the information and forward it over to the storage account or the data lake. I'm going to drop this down to 1 minute just for this example, and we're going to set our capture provider to a storage account, and now we need to go through then and select a container. So let's do that, and we're going to put this in our Skylines demo storage account and the Skylines Event Hub container. So let's go ahead and select that. And then here you can see we've got our file formats that we want to send it to. So you can see we've got a couple different options there. We're going to leave it with the default, and let's go ahead and create. So now that this is created, let's go ahead and send some data to it. So if we go back to home, go to our nJAP01 app service, and we're going to scroll down to our diagnostic settings. And let's go ahead and edit this. And now instead of sending it to just a Log Analytics workspace, let's go ahead and stream that data to an Event Hub. And we're going to go ahead and we see we've got, by default, we've only got the one namespace, so it's going to populate that for us. But now we need to go through and select an Event Hub. And we're just going to go ahead and select the Skylines EH Event Hub. And then now we have that policy name. So we have the Send Listen or the Shared Root Access Key. We're going to leave that as a default of the root managed shared access key for now. And let's go ahead and hit save. It looks like that's updated. So now let's go back to nJAP01. Scroll up to the top. Let's open up the to-do list. And we're just going to go in here and make a few changes just to generate some data. So we'll go ahead and add 3, 4. And we're going to go ahead and remove this. We'll just do example 23. And then we'll do example 4, 5, 6. And save. So now we've just generated some data. So now what's going to happen is that's going to take the data from the web app. It's going to save it as a diagnostic settings and then pass that along to the Event Hub. The Event Hub is going to store that because of the message retention that we've defined of 3 days. As well, since we've defined capture, it's also going to take that information and send it over to that storage account. So let's go back to home. Let's go ahead and open up that storage account. Let's go ahead and open the container. And then we've got our Skylines Event Hub container. And look, we've got some information there already. So let's go ahead and open that up. Let's go ahead and browse down. And then you can see we've got that file. It looks like that was updated just a little bit ago. And essentially that AVRO file is an Apache format. And what that is basically just logging. But again, with the capture function, now we don't have to worry about that message retention. So this data will live here until it's manually removed. Unlike if we left it sit within the Event Hub, once that message retention is reached, then it's going to go ahead and automatically purge that old information. Hopefully this helped explains Event Hubs as far as how they're created, how they're used, and then also how you can leverage the capture function. Let's jump back to the PowerPoints. We'll take a look at our third event-based solution.